All right, let's get into the final showdown, Mises versus Marx. These are two thinkers whose ideas really shaped our world. And it all boils down to one huge question: which system is actually better for human progress? Let's start with how they saw capitalism. For Mises, it served the masses. For Marx, it was just class struggle. Mises believed capitalism completely broke down old social barriers, letting anyone rise up through innovation. But Marx saw it differently. Society was split into just two camps, the owners and the workers. And Marx didn't pull any punches. He said this new system was just open, direct, and brutal exploitation. Okay, so where does wealth even come from? As you can guess, their answers were polar opposites. Mises saw a positive feedback loop. Savings lead to better tools, which means higher productivity and, yep, higher wages for all. Marx completely disagreed. He argued a worker's labor only makes the capitalist richer, not themselves. He saw capital as a social power, created by everyone but owned by just a few. This brings us to another huge battleground. What should the role of the government be in all of this? For Mises, the state needed to stay out. For Marx, the state was just a tool for the ruling class. Mises's killer argument was that without market prices, socialist planners are just flying blind. It's impossible. Marx, on the other hand, wanted the workers to seize the state and use its power to transform everything. And all of this leads to their most fundamental disagreement. What does it actually mean to be free? For Mises, economic freedom was the foundation for all other freedoms. Marx called that a lie, just freedom to exploit. Mises' warning was clear. If the state is the only boss, you have no real individual choice left. But as Marx famously put it, workers have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. So in the end, there's just no common ground here. These two worldviews simply cannot be reconciled. It really boils down to this. Is the free market the source of liberty, or is it the engine of exploitation? And that leaves us with the final big question. Which of these perspectives better explains the world we live in now? All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're setting the stage for an epic showdown, a head-to-head confrontation between two monumental ideas that have truly shaped the world we live in. Okay, so here are our contenders. In one corner, we've got Ludwig von Mises and his powerful defense of the free market, laid out in As Seis Lições. And in the other corner, the searing critique of that very system from Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in Manifesto Comunista. You have to understand, these aren't just books, they are completely opposite blueprints for how society should run. And that really brings us to the core question of this whole analysis, doesn't it? If we stick strictly to what's argued in these two works, which path actually leads to human progress and well-being? Is it the free market capitalism that Mises champions, or is it the revolution that Marx calls for? It's a question that has been debated for well over a century, and honestly, it feels more relevant now than ever. So, to really get to the bottom of this, we're going to break it down into 6 key rounds. We'll look at their two clashing worlds, what they believe drives society, the role of the state, where wealth comes from, what freedom really means, and finally, why this fight is still going on today. Let's kick things off with the most basic question of all. What is the real engine of society? What's the force that pushes history forward? For Mises and Marx, the answers could not be more different. So, Mises comes in with this really powerful idea he calls consumer sovereignty. He argues that in a capitalist system, the real bosses aren't the CEOs or the factory owners, it's us, the consumers. Every single time you buy something, you're casting a vote for what gets made. Think about it, right? A viral TikTok can make some random product sell out overnight, or a huge public backlash can force a billion-dollar company to completely change its ways. For Mises, this system is what creates incredible social mobility because anyone can get rich by figuring out what people want and giving it to them. Now, Marx, he sees a totally different engine driving everything: class struggle. He says history isn't about consumer choice, not at all. It's about a constant grinding conflict between the owners, the bourgeoisie, and the workers, the proletariat. And this isn't some ancient history for him. He'd say it's the hidden tension behind today's fights over minimum wage, union drives at big companies, and the whole debate around the gig economy. And this line right here, wow, it perfectly captures his entire worldview. For Marx, this conflict isn't just a flaw in the system that we can fix. He believes it is the system. Society doesn't move forward because of cooperation in the marketplace. It lurches forward because of the never-ending fight between these two classes. So, if you have these two completely different ideas about what drives society, it's no surprise that you end up with polar opposite views on the government. What is the state's job supposed to be? Is it a neutral referee, or is it a tool for one side to dominate the other? And you can see just how far apart they are right here. For Mises, the state's role is super limited. Basically, protect people's property, make sure contracts are honored, and then get out of the way. But for Marx, the state is anything but neutral. He sees it as the executive committee of the ruling class, designed from the ground up to protect their interests and maintain the system of exploitation. And Mises is really passionate about this point. He argues that any time the government tries to intervene, say by setting prices for milk or rent, it inevitably creates a mess. You get shortages, black markets, and resources go to the wrong places. Worse, he says, it starts a vicious cycle. One intervention creates a problem which leads to another intervention, and on until you're pushed all the way down the road to socialism, a system he believed was fundamentally broken, because without market prices, you have no way to know what anything is actually worth. Now, Marx agrees the state is a tool, but he wants the workers to grab that tool and turn it on its makers. The whole point of the revolution, in his view, is for the working class to seize political power, not to keep the state forever, but to use it as a temporary weapon. The goal is to wipe out the private ownership of capital and create a classless society where eventually the state itself would just wither away because it would no longer be needed. Okay, this brings us right to the heart of the economic argument. We all want a better life, but where does wealth, where does prosperity actually come from? Is it something that's built through saving and investment, or is it something that's taken through exploitation? For Mises, the process is actually pretty clear and logical. It all begins with a simple act: saving. When people don't spend everything they earn, that leftover money becomes capital. That capital then gets invested in better tools, better machines, better technology. All that new stuff makes workers way more productive. And here's the kicker. When productivity goes up, real wages and living standards go up for everyone. So for Mises, capital is the engine that lifts everybody up. But then you read this from Marx, and it just flips that entire idea on its head. This is such a powerful quote because he's arguing the exact opposite. He says the worker's labor doesn't create wealth for the worker. No, it creates capital for the boss, which is the very thing that is then used to exploit more workers. It's a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle. And this table breaks down that logic perfectly. You've got the worker who sells the only thing they have, their ability to work. And that work creates value. But the wage they get paid isn't based on the value they create. It's just the bare minimum to keep them alive and able to come back to work tomorrow. The difference, that extra value they created, is what Marx calls surplus value. And the capitalist takes it and it becomes capital, which is then used to hire more workers to extract even more surplus value. In this view, it's not wealth creation, it's wealth extraction. So we've looked at how they see society, the state, and the economy, all big, abstract things. But what does it all mean for you and me, for the individual? What does it actually mean to be free? Is the freedom you find in the marketplace real, or is it just an illusion? When it comes to freedom, Mises does not mince words. He says economic freedom is the bedrock of all other freedoms. The ability to own your stuff, to choose your own career, to start a business, to spend your money how you want, that isn't just one freedom among many. For him, it's the one that makes every other freedom possible. Without it, you have no real independence from the power of the state. And this is where he offers a pretty chilling warning. If the government controls the whole economy, it controls your whole life. You become totally dependent on the state for your job, your house, everything. He asks, how can you have a free press if the government owns all the paper and all the printing presses? For Mises, getting rid of the market inevitably means getting rid of individual freedom. But to Marx, that so-called market freedom is a total sham. I mean, what kind of freedom does a worker really have when their only choice is to work for this boss or that boss, with the threat of poverty always hanging over their head? He would call that a formal freedom. It's a nice idea that hides the real economic power imbalance. For Marx, true freedom only becomes possible after you overthrow that system of exploitation. It's a collective freedom, where everyone is finally able to reach their full potential. So here we are at the end of this intellectual boxing match. And what have we seen? We've seen two completely different ways of looking at the world, and they lead to diagnoses that just cannot be reconciled. This final comparison really says it all. Mises' final word is that the free market is the only game in town for prosperity and freedom. And any problems you see, well, that's just the fault of government meddling. Marx's conclusion, the problems, the exploitation, the crises, they aren't accidents. They're baked into the very DNA of capitalism, which means its revolutionary overthrow is not only necessary, but inevitable. And let's be clear, these aren't just some dusty 19th century ideas. They are two incredibly powerful and totally opposing lenses that we can still use to look at and understand our world today. They continue to fuel our most intense debates about politics, justice, and the economy. These are more than just two worldviews. They are still right at the absolute center of how we try to make sense of the biggest challenges of our time. Every single debate we have about inequality, about regulation, about freedom, it is in some way a continuation of this great clash of ideas. And so that leaves us with one last question for you to think about. After hearing the core arguments from both sides, from Mises' Essays Lycées and Marx's Manifesto, which one of these lenses do you think does a better job of explaining the world that you see around you every day? Because this debate, it is far from over.